Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. The Voice That Answered Back. I don't know why, but I've always talked to myself when I'm alone. Not in a weird way, just little comments, observations, the kind of mundane narration that fills the silence. Where did I put my keys? Or God, I need coffee. Harmless stuff, normal stuff. At least that's what I thought until the week I spent house-sitting for my parents. They'd gone on a cruise, their first real vacation in years, and asked if I could stay at their place to watch the house and feed their cat, Mr. Whiskers. Easy money, I figured. I'd been living in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, so the idea of having an entire house to myself for 10 days sounded like paradise. Quiet, space, no one eating my food or leaving dishes in the sink. The house was exactly as I remembered from childhood. A modest 2-story colonial in a quiet suburb with creaky hardwood floors and that specific smell every old house has. A mix of lavender air freshener and something faintly musty. My old bedroom had been converted into my mom's craft room, so I set up in the guest room down the hall. That first night I ordered pizza, binge-watched some Netflix, and fell asleep feeling completely at ease. The talking started on day 2. I was making breakfast, shuffling around the kitchen in my sweatpants, and I found myself narrating my actions. Okay, eggs. Where are the... there we go. I cracked 2 eggs into a pan, humming to myself. Little salt, little pepper, perfect. It was comforting hearing my own voice fill the empty space. The house felt too quiet otherwise, almost oppressively so. My parents didn't even have a TV in the kitchen, just the tick-tick-tick of the old clock on the wall. By the 3rd day, I was doing it constantly. Need to remember to take out the trash. Where's that damn cat, Mr. Whiskers? I should call Mom, let her know everything's fine. It became a rhythm, a way to feel less alone in a house that suddenly felt much bigger than I remembered. Looking back, I think that's what it was waiting for me to establish that pattern, that habit. For me to get comfortable. It was the 3rd night when everything changed. I was in the kitchen again, making tea around 10:30. I just put the kettle on and was reaching for a mug when I said out loud, God, I'm exhausted. Why am I even making tea? I should just go to bed. And then, from the living room, I heard my own voice respond. You should. You look tired. I froze. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile floor, but I barely registered the sound. Every hair on my body stood up. That was my voice. Not similar, identical. The same pitch, the same inflection, the same slight rasp I get when I'm tired. It came from the living room, clear as day, like I was standing in there talking to myself. My first thought, desperate and rational, was that I'd left the TV on. I must have. Maybe I'd been watching something earlier and forgot to turn it off, and some actor who happened to sound like me had just delivered a line. It was a stretch, but it was the only explanation that didn't make my skin crawl. I stepped carefully over the broken mug and walked slowly toward the living room, my heart hammering. The house was dark except for the kitchen light behind me, casting long shadows down the hallway. Hello? I called out, my voice shaking. No response, just the tick-tick-tick of that damn clock. When I reached the living room, I fumbled for the light switch. The room flooded with harsh yellow light, revealing absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The TV was off, its screen black and reflective. The room was empty. No one was there. I checked anyway, my hands trembling as I picked up the remote and confirmed the TV hadn't been on. I even checked the power strip, it was switched off. The TV hadn't been on all day. I'm losing it, I muttered to myself, laughing nervously. I'm literally losing my mind. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. I knew what I'd heard. That was my voice, speaking words I hadn't said from a room I wasn't in. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the house settling, every distant sound from outside made me bolt upright in bed. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it, that I was overtired, that being alone for days had messed with my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the house was listening. The next day, I tried to act normal. I fed the cat, did some laundry, watched TV in the living room with the volume up high. I didn't talk to myself, not once. If I needed to think through something, I kept it in my head, my jaw clenched shut. The silence felt safer, even if it was suffocating. But that night I slipped. I was brushing my teeth in the upstairs bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, and without thinking I said, "You look like hell, Jordan, seriously." It was automatic, thoughtless. I didn't even realize I'd done it until I heard the response. From the hallway just outside the bathroom door, my voice said, "I know. I haven't been sleeping." I dropped my toothbrush. It clattered into the sink as I spun around, foam still in my mouth. The bathroom door was open and the hallway beyond was dark and empty. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. I spit into the sink and wiped my mouth with shaking hands. "This isn't funny. Who the fuck is in this house?" Silence. Just the drip, drip, drip of the faucet and my own ragged breathing. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something, anything, to happen. When nothing did, I grabbed my phone from the counter and turned on its flashlight, sweeping the beam down the hallway. Empty. Every door was closed except mine. The guest room at the end of the hall. I checked every room anyway, flipping on lights, throwing open closets, even checking under beds like a terrified child. Nothing. I was alone. Except I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. That night I barely slept. I left every light in the house on and kept my phone clutched in my hand, ready to call 911. I listened to every sound, trying to separate normal house noises from something else. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps climbing from the first floor to the second. I held my breath, straining to hear. They stopped at the top of the stairs, right outside my room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I was paralyzed, clutching my blanket like it could protect me, and then I heard it, my own voice, barely a whisper, right outside my door. "Are you awake, Jordan? I know you are." Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice continued, soft and conversational, like I was talking to myself in the dark. "You should try to sleep. You have a long day tomorrow. You need to feed the cat. You need to call your mom. You need to—" "Stop it!" I screamed, finally finding my voice. "Stop it! Whoever you are, just stop!" The voice went silent. The house went silent. Even the clock stopped ticking. I sat in that terrible, suffocating silence for hours, waiting for dawn, my phone in one hand and a pair of scissors from the bedside drawer in the other. When morning finally came, I packed my things in under 10 minutes. I didn't care about the cat, didn't care about my parents' house, didn't care about anything except getting out. As I was rushing down the stairs, my keys in hand, I passed the hall mirror. And in the reflection, standing behind me on the stairs, I saw myself. Another me. It smiled, opened its mouth, and in my voice said, "Leaving so soon?" I didn't look back. I ran out the front door, got in my car, and drove straight to my apartment. I called my parents from the road, told them there was a family emergency and I had to leave, that they'd need to find someone else to watch the house. They were confused, a little annoyed, but they didn't push. I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain what happened? They'd think I'd had a breakdown. I asked my roommate to go back with me later that day to get my things from the guest room. He didn't ask questions when he saw how pale I was, how badly my hands were shaking. We went in together, grabbed my bag and left. He said the house seemed normal to him. Quiet, empty. He didn't hear anything unusual. I didn't tell him what I'd heard, what I'd seen. My parents came home 3 days later. I helped them unpack, forced smiles and small talk, pretended everything was fine. My mom asked if I'd had a good time staying there. I lied and said yes. She mentioned that Mr. Whiskers had been acting strange since they got back, hiding under furniture, hissing at empty corners. She laughed about it. I didn't. To this day, I don't talk to myself anymore. Not when I'm alone, not even when I think I'm alone. I've broken the habit completely. Because sometimes, late at night when my apartment is dark and quiet, I still hear it. Just at the edge of my hearing, so faint I can almost convince myself I'm imagining it. My own voice, somewhere in the darkness, whispering things I never said. And I know that whatever was in my parents' house is still listening, still learning, still waiting for me to answer back. Story 2. Someone had been sleeping in my bed. My girlfriend Ashley and I had been living together for about 8 months when her company sent her on a week-long business trip to Seattle. It was the first time since we'd moved in together that I'd have the apartment completely to myself, and honestly, I was kind of looking forward to it. Not in a bad way. I loved living with her, but there's something about having your own space for a few days that feels luxurious. I could sprawl out in bed, leave dishes in the sink for a day, watch whatever I wanted on TV without negotiating. The apartment was a decent one-bedroom in an older building downtown, 3rd floor, with big windows and hardwood floors that creaked if you stepped in the wrong places. We'd moved in during summer and now it was late October. The building was solid, mostly quiet, with good neighbors. I'd never felt unsafe there, not once. Ashley left on a Sunday morning. I drove her to the airport, kissed her goodbye, and came home to an empty apartment that suddenly felt larger than usual. I spent that first day doing bachelor stuff, ordered Thai food, played video games until 2 in the morning, left my clothes on the floor. It was great. When I finally crawled into bed, I spread out diagonally across the mattress, taking up as much space as possible. I fell asleep easily, the window cracked open to let in the cool autumn air. I woke up Monday morning feeling weird, not sick, just off, disoriented. Like I'd slept poorly even though I'd been out cold. As I sat up and rubbed my eyes, I noticed Ashley's pillow, the one on her side of the bed, was on my side, tucked against the headboard. That was strange. I always slept on the right side, she slept on the left, and I definitely hadn't moved her pillow. I must have thrashed around in my sleep, I figured, grabbed it without thinking. But then I noticed other things. The comforter was pulled back on Ashley's side of the bed like someone had gotten up from there. The fitted sheet had come loose from one corner, and there was a smell, faint, but definitely there. Not Ashley's perfume, not my cologne, not the lavender detergent we used, something else. Something unfamiliar. Almost like cigarette smoke. But neither of us smoked, and I hadn't had anyone over. I stripped the bed and remade it, convincing myself I'd just had a restless night. I'd probably been moving around a lot, subconsciously missing Ashley's presence. The smell was probably drifting in from a neighbor's apartment. Old buildings did that. Tuesday morning, the same thing. I woke up with Ashley's pillow on my side again, the sheets disturbed on her side of the bed, that same faint smell lingering in the air. This time, the unease was stronger. I was certain I'd fallen asleep on my side with the bed neat and my pillow in the right place. I remembered specifically checking before I turned out the light. I started paying closer attention. That night before bed, I arranged everything deliberately. My pillow on the right, Ashley's pillow on the left. Comforter pulled up neatly on both sides. I even took a photo with my phone. Time-stamped, just to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. I made sure all the windows were locked, checked the front door twice, even looked under the bed like an idiot. Then I turned off the light and forced myself to sleep. Wednesday morning, I jolted awake with my heart racing, though I couldn't remember why. The first thing I did was look at the bed. Ashley's pillow was gone. Not just moved, but completely gone. I found it on the floor on her side, like someone had pushed it off during the night. The sheets on her side were pulled back again, more dramatically this time, and there was an indentation in the mattress, like someone had been lying there. That smell was stronger now. Cigarette smoke, definitely, but something else underneath it, something stale and unwashed. I pulled out my phone and compared the current state of the bed to the photo I'd taken the night before. The difference was undeniable. Something had disturbed the bed while I was sleeping. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick and spent hours tearing the apartment apart, looking for any explanation. Maybe it was a draft from the window causing the sheets to move, but the windows were locked. Maybe I was sleepwalking, but I'd never sleepwalked in my life, and that wouldn't explain the smell or the pillow ending up on the floor. I checked every closet, every cabinet, every possible hiding place. Nothing. That afternoon, paranoid and exhausted, I remembered the security camera. When we'd first moved in, Ashley had insisted on getting one of those cheap indoor cameras, the kind you point at your front door to see who's coming and going. We'd mounted it on a bookshelf in the living room, angled toward the door. I'd honestly forgotten it was there. We barely checked the footage unless we were expecting a delivery. I pulled up the app on my phone, my hands shaking. The camera had motion detection and night vision. If someone had come into the apartment, it would have caught them. I scrolled back to Monday night, to the timestamp after I'd gone to bed. For a while, nothing. Just darkness and the faint glow of streetlights through the window. Then at 2:47 a.m., the camera detected motion. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as the bedroom door, visible from the camera's angle, slowly opened. A figure stepped out. It was too dark to make out features, but I could see the silhouette clearly. Someone had been in my bedroom. Someone had been in the apartment with me while I slept. The figure moved slowly through the living room, pausing to look around, then disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, they returned to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat there, staring at my phone, unable to breathe. Someone had been inside. They'd been walking around while I was unconscious and vulnerable. I scrolled to Tuesday night. Same thing. 2:47 a.m., almost to the minute. The bedroom door opened and the figure emerged. This time they lingered longer in the living room, standing in front of the bookshelf where the camera was mounted. For a horrible moment, I thought they were going to notice it. But they turned away and went into the bathroom. I heard the toilet flush through the phone's tinny speaker. They were making themselves at home. My mind reeled. How were they getting in? I checked the footage from earlier in the night, watching myself lock the door, check the windows, and go to bed. No one came in after that, which meant they were already inside, hiding somewhere, waiting for me to fall asleep. I checked Tuesday's full footage, hour by hour, my stomach churning. And then I found it. Around 6 p.m., just before I got home from work, the bedroom door opened from the inside. The figure stepped out, went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out food, my food. They ate standing at the counter, casual and unhurried, like they lived there. Then they returned to the bedroom and closed the door just minutes before I came home. They were living in my bedroom. Hiding during the day, probably in the closet or under the bed, and coming out at night. I forced myself to check Monday's footage, then Sunday's. My vision blurred with tears as I watched. Sunday night, after I'd gone to bed, the figure had emerged and stood at the bedroom doorway for nearly 20 minutes, just watching me sleep. Then they'd walked to Ashley's side of the bed and climbed in. They'd lain there next to me, inches away, for hours. I could see the mattress dip under their weight. At one point, they'd reached out and touched my hair. I dropped my phone and vomited into the kitchen sink. Someone had been sleeping next to me. Someone had been in my bed, breathing the same air, lying so close I could have rolled over and touched them for 3 nights, maybe more. I called the police from my car. I'd run out of the apartment without even grabbing shoes. They met me outside the building and 4 officers went up with their weapons drawn. I waited on the sidewalk, shaking violently as they cleared the apartment. They found him in the bedroom closet, crouched behind Ashley's hanging dresses. A man in his 40s, thin and filthy, with greasy hair and clothes that reeked of cigarette smoke and sweat. He didn't resist, didn't even seem surprised. He just smiled at the officers and asked if the girl was coming back soon. He meant Ashley. The detectives told me later that he'd been breaking in through a bathroom window that faced the fire escape, a window I'd never thought to check because it was small and seemed inaccessible. He'd been doing it for weeks, they said, maybe longer. They found a collection of Ashley's underwear in his pockets, photos of her on his phone taken while she slept. The timestamps went back months, long before her trip. He'd been waiting for her to be alone. But when she left and I stayed, he'd adjusted his plan. I was just something to work around, an obstacle between him and Ashley. So he'd hidden during the day and come out at night, sleeping beside me in her place, pretending we were together. Ashley flew home the next day. We moved out within the week, breaking our lease and losing our deposit. We didn't care. Neither of us could stand to be in that apartment for another second. We found a new place across town, ground floor with bars on the windows and 3 different locks on the door. But some nights I still wake up at 2:47 a.m. exactly, my heart pounding, convinced I can smell cigarette smoke. I'll reach over to Ashley's side of the bed just to make sure she's there, that she's real, that she's safe. And sometimes in that half-awake state, I swear I feel the mattress dip on her side, like someone else is climbing in. I'll turn on every light in the apartment, check every closet, look under the bed. I know he's in prison. I know he can't get to us. But I also know what it feels like to sleep inches away from a stranger and never know they were there. And I don't think I'll ever feel safe in the dark again. Story 3. The basement door kept opening. The rental house on Maple Street was exactly what I needed. Cheap, available immediately, and in a decent neighborhood. I just started a new job across town and didn't have time to be picky. The landlord, an older guy named Mr. Patterson, met me for the walkthrough on a gray Saturday afternoon. The house was small but clean, a 1-story bungalow with creaky floors and outdated fixtures, the kind of place that had probably been built in the 50s and hadn't been updated much since. Everything seemed fine until we reached the door at the end of the kitchen hallway. It was painted white, same as all the others, but it had 3 separate locks. A standard keyed deadbolt, a barrel bolt at the top, and a heavy-duty padlock through a metal hasp. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and said, "That's the basement. It's not part of the rental. You won't have access to it, and I need you to agree not to try to go down there." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Okay, Bluebeard. What's down there, your secret treasure?" He didn't smile. "The foundation's unstable. The stairs are rotting. It's a liability issue. I'm serious. Don't go down there. I need your word." It was weird, sure, but I didn't care about a basement. I wasn't planning to store anything down there anyway. I signed the lease that afternoon and moved in 3 days later. The basement door with its 3 locks became just another quirk of the house. I barely thought about it. For the first week, everything was normal. I settled into a routine. Work during the day, dinner and TV at night, asleep by 11. The house had its noises like all old houses do. Pipes clanged when I ran hot water. The floor creaked when I walked through the hallway. The wind made the windows rattle. Nothing unusual, nothing that kept me up at night. Then, on my 8th night in the house, I woke up at 3 in the morning to use the bathroom. As I shuffled down the dark hallway half asleep, I noticed something that made me freeze. The basement door was open, not just unlocked, fully open, standing wide like someone had just walked through. The darkness beyond it was absolute, a black rectangle that seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. My heart kicked into overdrive. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. All 3 locks were undone. The deadbolt turned, the barrel bolt slid back, the padlock hanging open on its hasp. I definitely hadn't opened it. I hadn't even touched that door since moving in. I approached slowly, every horror movie I'd ever seen flashing through my mind. When I got close enough, I peered into the darkness. A set of wooden stairs descended into nothing. I couldn't see the bottom. The air that drifted up was cold and damp, smelling of mold and something else, something rotten and organic like spoiled meat. "Hello?" I called down, my voice embarrassingly shaky. No response, just that cold air and the smell. I slammed the door shut and spent the next 10 minutes relocking everything, my hands fumbling with the barrel bolt and padlock. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe the locks had been faulty, not properly engaged. Maybe I'd been so tired when I went to bed that I'd forgotten Mr. Patterson had left the door open during my walkthrough. Except he hadn't. I remembered clearly. All 3 locks had been secured. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, periodically checking the basement door. It stayed closed. By morning, I'd half convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing or that the locks really had just been loose. But the next night, it happened again. I woke up at 3 a.m. Exactly 3 a.m. I noticed this time, and the basement door was standing open. All 3 locks undone. I could see them in the dim light from the street lamp outside. The deadbolt turned, the barrel bolt retracted, the padlock hanging loose. This time, I called Mr. Patterson. He answered on the 5th ring, groggy and annoyed. I explained what was happening, trying not to sound hysterical. There was a long pause before he said, "Are you sure you're not opening it yourself? Maybe sleepwalking." "I don't sleepwalk," I said. "And even if I did, how would I unlock 3 separate locks in my sleep?" Another pause. "Lock it back up. Make sure all 3 are secure. I'll come by tomorrow and check the mechanisms." He never came by. When I called the next day, he didn't answer. I left 2 voicemails. He didn't return them. That night, I took precautions. Before bed, I locked all 3 locks and then dragged the kitchen table across the hallway, wedging it against the basement door. If the door opened, the table would fall and the noise would wake me up. Satisfied, I went to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m. to silence. No crash, no sound of furniture moving, just the terrible certainty that something was wrong. I got up and walked to the hallway, already knowing what I'd find. The kitchen table was exactly where I'd left it, wedged tightly against the door. And behind it, the basement door stood open, somehow having swung inward past the table without moving it an inch. It was physically impossible. The door opened into the hallway, not into the basement. It should have slammed into the table. Instead, it was open behind the barricade, as if the door had passed through solid wood. I moved out the next day, packed my essentials, called in sick to work, and crashed at my buddy Tyler's apartment. When I told him what happened, he looked at me like I was insane. "Dude, you probably just forgot you moved the table, or you moved it in your sleep." I didn't argue. I knew what I'd seen. I also knew I wasn't going back to that house, but I had a year-long lease and couldn't afford to pay rent on 2 places. After 3 days at Tyler's, I ran out of excuses. I had to go back, at least to figure out what to do next. Tyler agreed to come with me, probably just to prove I was overreacting. We arrived in the afternoon, the sun still bright and the house looking perfectly ordinary in the daylight. Tyler whistled when he saw the basement door with its triple locks. That's some serious overkill. What's the landlord hiding down there? I don't know, and I don't want to find out, I said. But Tyler was already grinning, the kind of grin that meant he was about to do something stupid. Come on, man. Let's just look. You're paying rent on this place. You have a right to know what's in your own basement. It's not part of the rental, I protested, but Tyler was already pulling out his phone, using the flashlight to peer down the stairs. Tyler, seriously, don't... It's just stairs, bro. Relax. He started descending, his footsteps echoing in the darkness. See? Nothing down here, just a creepy old basement. I stood at the top, gripping the door frame, every instinct screaming at me not to let him go down there. Tyler, come back up right now. His voice echoed from below. There's some weird shit down here, old furniture, boxes. Looks like someone was living down here at some point. There's a mattress and... Oh, what the fuck? What? Tyler, what is it? He didn't answer. I heard his footsteps quickening, coming back up the stairs fast. Too fast. He burst through the doorway, his face pale, and grabbed my arm. We need to leave, right now. What did you see? Chains, he said, his voice shaking. There are chains bolted to the wall and scratches like claw marks all over the floor and walls, and... He swallowed hard. There's a door down there. A door in the basement that's chained shut from the outside. And I heard something behind it. Breathing. We ran. Left the door wide open, got in Tyler's car, and drove straight to the police station. I told them everything. The door opening every night, the locks, what Tyler had seen in the basement. They sent 2 officers to investigate. They found the chains. They found the scratches. They found the second door in the basement, the one chained shut. When they opened it, they found a small room, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with no windows. The walls were covered in tally marks, thousands of them. In the corner was a pile of old blankets and empty food containers. The room smelled like death. They never found anyone down there, no body, no evidence of who had been kept in that room or when. The house had changed hands several times over the years, and Mr. Patterson had only owned it for 6 months. He claimed he'd never been in the basement, that the previous owner had warned him it was unsafe and he'd just locked it up without checking. The police investigated, but the case went cold. No missing persons matched the time frame. No one could explain the chains or the tally marks or who had been scratching at that door. I broke my lease. I didn't care about the penalty. I never went back to that house, not even to get my furniture. Tyler helped me replace everything. But I still wake up sometimes at 3 a.m., my heart pounding, and I think about that door. About how it opened from the inside, how the locks were undone from the basement side. About what Tyler heard breathing behind that chained door. And I wonder if we got out before whatever was down there realized we'd found it. Because some nights, I swear I can still smell that basement, cold and damp and rotting, like something followed me out and has been waiting ever since for me to fall asleep so it can finish climbing those stairs. Story 4. I found photographs of myself sleeping. Moving into a new apartment should have felt like a fresh start. I just ended a long-term relationship, left a job I hated, and found a decent 1-bedroom in an older building on the east side of town. It wasn't fancy, scuffed hardwood floors, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with tiles that had probably been installed in the 70s. But it was mine, and the rent was manageable. The landlord, a friendly woman named Mrs. Chen, told me the previous tenant had left in a hurry, breaking their lease early. Some family emergency, she'd said with a dismissive wave. Left half their stuff behind. I cleaned out most of it, but you might find some odds and ends in drawers. Just toss whatever you don't need. I moved in on a Saturday in late September and spent the weekend unpacking and settling in. The apartment had good light, big windows that faced the street, and enough space that I didn't feel claustrophobic. By Monday, I'd arranged my furniture, stocked the fridge, and started to feel at home. I even liked the neighborhood. Quiet, tree-lined streets, a coffee shop on the corner, friendly neighbors who nodded hello in the hallway. The first week passed uneventfully. I fell into a routine: work during the day, dinner and Netflix at night, asleep by 11. The apartment felt safe and comfortable. I slept better than I had in months. It was the second Friday night when I decided to deep clean the kitchen. I'd been putting it off, but the cabinets and drawers still smelled faintly of whatever cleaning product Mrs. Chen had used, and I wanted to line them with fresh paper. As I emptied the drawer beside the stove, the one filled with takeout menus and rubber bands and the random junk every kitchen accumulates, I felt something taped to the back panel. I pulled the drawer out completely and found a small USB drive secured with a piece of Scotch tape that had yellowed with age. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured it probably belonged to the previous tenant and might have personal files or photos they'd want back. Maybe I could track them down through Mrs. Chen and return it. I grabbed my laptop, settled on the couch, and plugged the drive in. The drive contained a single folder labeled Backup. Inside were hundreds of image files, organized by date. The oldest files were from 3 months ago, around June. The most recent were from early September, just a few weeks before I'd moved in. I clicked on one of the middle files, expecting vacation photos or family pictures. The image that opened made my blood run cold. It was a photograph of someone sleeping in a bed. Not just any bed, this bed, my bed. The sheets were different, but I recognized the wall behind the headboard, the window to the left, the shape of the room. The angle was strange, taken from above and to the side like the camera had been positioned on a high shelf or mounted near the ceiling. The photo was high resolution and in full color, lit by the ambient streetlight coming through the window. The person in the bed was a young woman lying on her side, her face partially obscured by her hair. She was asleep, her expression peaceful. The timestamp in the corner of the image read June 18th, 2:47 a.m. My hands started to shake. I clicked to the next image. Same scene, same bed, different night. June 19th, 2:51 a.m. Then June 20th, 3:03 a.m. I kept clicking faster now, my stomach twisting into knots. There were dozens of photos, all of the same woman, all taken while she slept. Different nights, different angles. Some were taken from the foot of the bed, some from the doorway. Some were close-ups of her face. And then the angles changed. Photos taken from inside the closet, the perspective partially obscured by hanging clothes. The woman was still asleep, unaware. The timestamp, July the 2nd, 2:34 a.m. I felt like I was going to be sick. Someone had been in this apartment photographing the previous tenant while she slept for weeks. Maybe months. And they'd hidden a camera, multiple cameras judging by the different angles throughout the bedroom. I forced myself to keep looking. The photos continued through July and into August. Different pajamas, different positions, but always the same woman, always asleep. And then, in mid-August, something changed. The photos started including me. Not me personally, I hadn't moved in yet. But photos of the empty bed, freshly made. Photos of the bedroom with boxes stacked in the corner. My moving boxes. Photos time-stamped from late August, just before I'd signed the lease. And then, from early September, photos of me, asleep, in my bed, in my apartment. I dropped the laptop like it had burned me. The computer clattered onto the coffee table, the screen still displaying one of the images, me, asleep on my stomach, and my face turned toward the camera, my mouth slightly open. The timestamp read September 8th, 3:12 a.m. That was 5 days ago. 5 days ago, someone had been in my bedroom while I slept and taken my picture. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I stood up, my legs shaking, and stumbled to the bedroom. The room looked normal, bed neatly made, clothes folded on the chair, nothing out of place. But now it felt violated, contaminated. I started searching, tearing through the closet, checking behind furniture, running my hands along the walls and ceiling. Where were the cameras? Where had they been hidden? I found the first one in the smoke detector. It wasn't a real smoke detector. I realized that as soon as I pulled it down. It was too light, and the plastic casing popped off easily to reveal a small lens and a battery pack. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The second camera was hidden in the vent above the closet, tucked into the ductwork, its lens barely visible behind the slats. The third was inside a decorative picture frame on the dresser. The picture had a tiny hole drilled through the corner of the glass. 3 cameras, 3 angles, all pointed at the bed. I gathered them into a plastic bag, my skin crawling, and then I checked the rest of the apartment. I found another camera in the bathroom hidden in the shower rod brackets. One in the kitchen inside a smoke detector identical to the one in the bedroom. 2 in the living room. 1 in a wall clock. 1 in a houseplant that Mrs. Chen must have left behind. 7 cameras total. 7 places where someone had been watching me, recording me, documenting my life. I had been living under surveillance in my own home and never knew. I called the police from the hallway outside my apartment, refusing to go back inside. They arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers who initially seemed skeptical until I showed them the cameras and the USB drive. Their expressions changed from polite interest to grim concern as they scrolled through the photos. The investigation moved quickly after that. The detective assigned to my case, a woman named Detective Reeves, told me the cameras were commercially available and hard to trace, but the USB drive had file metadata that might help identify who'd created the folders. She also wanted to speak to Mrs. Chen about the previous tenant and anyone who had access to the apartment. That's when things got worse. Mrs. Chen provided the previous tenant's forwarding information, and the police tracked her down. Her name was Lauren, and she'd moved across the country to her parents' house in Oregon after abruptly breaking her lease. When the police contacted her, she broke down. She told them she'd been experiencing the same thing I was. Objects moved, strange sounds at night, the feeling of being watched. She'd found one of the cameras in her bedroom by accident when the smoke detector had fallen off the ceiling. She'd panicked, grabbed what she could, and left the same day. She hadn't reported it because she was terrified and didn't know who to trust. She thought maybe the landlord was involved or someone with a key. Detective Reeves asked if anyone else had access to my apartment. I told her only Mrs. Chen as far as I knew. But the building was old, and who knew how many people had copies of the keys over the years? The detective nodded grimly and said they'd look into it. 3 days later, they arrested him, a maintenance worker named Kyle who'd been employed by the building management company for 2 years. He had master keys to every unit. He'd installed the cameras in Lauren's apartment shortly after she moved in, and had done the same to mine as soon as I signed the lease. When they searched his apartment, they found hard drives containing footage from dozens of units in the building, mostly women living alone, but not exclusively. Hours and hours of footage, years of surveillance. He confessed quickly, almost proudly, explaining how easy it had been. How no one ever suspected the maintenance guy, the helpful, friendly man who fixed leaky faucets and changed light bulbs. How he'd been doing it for years in different buildings before this one. How he'd only gotten sloppy with Lauren letting the smoke detector camera come loose. They told me I was lucky. If I hadn't found that USB drive, if Lauren hadn't hidden it in the drawer as some kind of evidence before she fled, he would have continued. I would have kept living there, oblivious, while he watched me sleep, shower, change clothes. The thought makes me want to vomit. I moved out immediately, broke the lease, forfeited my deposit, didn't care. I couldn't spend another night in that apartment knowing what had happened there. I crashed with friends for 2 weeks while I found a new place. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Now, wherever I live, I do sweeps. I check smoke detectors, picture frames, vents, clocks, anywhere a camera could hide. I cover the laptop camera with tape. I bought a signal detector online that scans for hidden recording devices. My friends think I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. But they didn't see those photos. They didn't see themselves asleep and vulnerable, captured from angles that meant someone had been standing in their bedroom in the dark, watching. The worst part isn't what happened. The worst part is not knowing how long I'd been living under surveillance before I found out. Was it just those 5 days? Or had he been watching longer and only the recent photos made it onto that USB drive? How many times had he stood in my room while I slept, adjusting cameras, reviewing footage, deciding which angles were best? I'll never know. And that's what keeps me up at night, the uncertainty, the violation, the knowledge that someone saw me at my most vulnerable and private, and I never had a clue. I check every smoke detector now. I inspect every gift, every houseplant, every piece of furniture. I sleep with my phone next to me, ready to call for help. And sometimes, late at night, I still wake up with the unshakable feeling that someone is watching me from the darkness, waiting for me to close my eyes again. Story 5. The footsteps stopped outside my door. My roommate Blake went home for the holidays 2 days before Christmas, leaving me alone in our apartment for just over 2 weeks. His family lived upstate, and he'd invited me to come along, but I'd declined. I had to work. Retail never sleeps during the holidays, and honestly, I was looking forward to having the place to myself. Blake was a great roommate, but 2 weeks of solitude sounded like luxury after months of sharing a bathroom and negotiating TV time. The apartment was a decent 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a 6-story building in a neighborhood that was mostly safe, mostly quiet. We'd been living there for almost a year, and I'd never had any issues. The building had good security, a locked front entrance that required a key fob, cameras in the lobby and hallways, neighbors who mostly kept to themselves but seemed friendly enough. Blake left on a Saturday morning, hauling 2 huge duffel bags and a wrapped present the size of a small refrigerator. "Don't burn the place down," he said, grinning. "And if you throw a party, at least invite me in spirit." "No parties," I promised. "Just me, the TV, and probably too much Chinese takeout." He left, and the apartment immediately felt bigger. I spent that day cleaning, doing laundry, sprawling on the couch in a way I couldn't when Blake was home. That night I ordered pizza, binged a show I'd been meaning to watch, and went to bed around midnight feeling perfectly content. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside our apartment. Not in the building hallway, in our hallway. The interior hallway that connected the bedrooms to the living room and kitchen. Slow, deliberate footsteps, the kind of measured pace someone uses when they're trying to move quietly but not quite succeeding. Our floors were old hardwood, and they creaked in specific places. I heard every creak as the footsteps moved from one end of the hallway to the other. I lay frozen in bed, listening. My first thought was that Blake had come back. Forgotten something, but that didn't make sense. He'd taken his keys, and I would have heard the front door open. The footsteps continued, pacing back and forth. 5 steps one way, pause, 5 steps back. The rhythm was methodical, almost meditative. Then they stopped. Directly outside my bedroom door, I could see the gap under the door, a thin strip of dim light from the nightlight we kept plugged in the hallway. I watched that strip of light, holding my breath, and saw a shadow cross it. Someone was standing right outside my door. I waited for a knock, for the door to open, for something. But nothing happened. The shadow stayed there, motionless, for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute. Then the footsteps resumed, pacing back to the other end of the hallway, and then returning to my door. The pattern repeated, 5 steps away, 5 steps back, stop outside my door. After maybe 10 minutes of this, the footsteps finally retreated. I heard them move down the hallway toward the living room and then silence. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands shaking, and pulled up Blake's number. But what would I say? That I heard footsteps? He'd tell me it was probably the upstairs neighbors or the building settling or my imagination. I set the phone down and lay awake until dawn, staring at the door, waiting for the footsteps to return. They didn't. When morning came, I got up and checked the entire apartment. Every door and window was locked. Nothing was out of place. I felt ridiculous, exhausted, and paranoid. I convinced myself I'd dreamed it or half-dreamed it, one of those hypnagogic hallucinations that happen in the space between sleep and waking. But the next night, it happened again. 3 a.m. exactly. I checked my phone when I first heard the footsteps. Same pattern. Slow, deliberate pacing in the hallway. 5 steps one direction, 5 steps back. And then the stop outside my door, the shadow blocking the light, the terrible stillness. This time I got up. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe anger, maybe desperation to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But I walked to the door, my heart hammering, and pressed my ear against it. I could hear breathing on the other side, slow, steady breaths, like someone standing calmly, patiently, just waiting. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The breathing stopped. The shadow under the door moved and the footsteps retreated rapidly, almost running down the hallway. I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing, the distinctive click of the deadbolt. I yanked my bedroom door open and ran down the hallway, flipping on lights as I went. The living room was empty. The front door was locked, deadbolt engaged, chain in place. Exactly as I'd left it before going to bed. That was impossible. I'd heard the door open and close. I'd heard someone leave. But the door was locked from the inside and I was alone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, a kitchen knife on the coffee table beside me, staring at the hallway and waiting for an explanation that never came. The third night, I tried to stay awake. I made coffee, put on a movie, told myself I'd keep watch and prove once and for all that nothing was happening. But exhaustion won. I fell asleep on the couch sometime after 2, and when I jolted awake, it was 3:07 a.m. I'd missed it. The footsteps must have already come and gone, except they hadn't. As I sat up, disoriented, I heard them starting. The slow pacing in the hallway, the creaking floorboards. 5 steps, pause, 5 steps back. My stomach dropped. I was in the living room. I had a clear line of sight down the hallway. It was dark, but the nightlight cast enough glow that I should have been able to see anyone moving. The hallway was empty. I could hear the footsteps, could hear exactly where they were coming from. The middle of the hallway, pacing back and forth. But there was no one there. Just empty space and the sound of someone walking. I turned on every light in the apartment. The footsteps continued, unaffected by the light. I watched the empty hallway, listened to the impossible sounds, and felt my grip on reality starting to slip. And then the footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door, just like the previous nights, even though I wasn't in there. The shadow appeared in the strip of light under the door. Something was standing outside my bedroom, waiting for me to be inside. I grabbed my phone and called Blake, not caring that it was 3 in the morning or that he'd think I was insane. He answered on the 4th ring, groggy and confused. "Dude, what? Is the apartment haunted?" I blurted out. "Did something happen here? Did the previous tenants say anything?" "What? No. What are you talking about?" I told him everything. The footsteps, the pattern, the shadow, the impossible sounds. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Are you sure you're not just stressed? The holidays can be—" "I'm not imagining this," I said. Something is in this apartment. Every night at 3 a.m. it paces the hallway and stops outside my door. Okay, he said, his voice taking on that careful tone people use when they're talking to someone they think might be unstable. Look, I'll call my cousin. He lives like 20 minutes from you. I'll have him come check on you, okay? Just to make sure you're all right. I don't need a wellness check. I need you to tell me if you've ever heard anything weird in this apartment. Another pause, then quietly. There was something. I didn't mention it because I thought it was nothing. But sometimes when you're not home, I hear footsteps at night, in the hallway. I always assumed it was you coming home late or getting up for water. But it's weird now that I think about it because it only happens when you're not there. My blood turned to ice. You hear it too? Yeah. But only when I'm alone. I figured I was just hearing the neighbors through the walls or something. We talked for another 20 minutes trying to make sense of it. Blake's cousin agreed to come over and I waited in the living room, all the lights on, listening to the footsteps continue their pacing. They didn't stop when Blake's cousin arrived around 4 a.m. He heard them too. His face went pale as we stood together in the living room, listening to the unmistakable sound of someone walking back and forth in the empty hallway. "What the fuck?" he whispered. We checked every inch of the apartment, closets, under beds, behind furniture. Nothing. The footsteps continued. Indifferent to our search, we left. I didn't even pack a bag, just grabbed my wallet and phone and got the hell out. Blake came home 2 days later and we moved out within the week, breaking our lease and citing uninhabitable conditions. The landlord threatened to sue, but we didn't care. We both knew what we'd heard, what we'd experienced. I did some research afterward. The building had been standing since the 50s and there was no record of any deaths or tragedies in our specific unit. But I found an old news article from 1987 about a woman in the building who'd reported being stalked by a neighbor. She'd filed multiple police reports claiming someone was entering her apartment at night while she slept. The neighbor was never identified. 3 months after her first report, she disappeared. They found her body in the basement of the building, hidden behind the boiler. She'd been dead for weeks. They never caught who killed her. The article didn't specify which apartment she'd lived in. But I knew. I knew it was ours, and I knew who had been pacing that hallway, stopping outside my door, waiting with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. I live in a new place now, a different building, a different neighborhood, but sometimes late at night I hear footsteps in the hallway. Slow and deliberate, 5 steps one way, 5 steps back. And I know that whatever was in that apartment followed me. It's still waiting outside my door. And one of these nights when I'm too tired or too scared to care, I'm going to open that door, and I don't know what I'll find standing there in the darkness, but I know it's been waiting for me all along. Story 6. Something was living in my attic. The scratching started the second week of November, right around the time the temperature dropped and the nights grew longer. I'd been living in the house for 3 months, a small 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town, the kind of place with drafty windows and radiators that clanged when they kicked on. The landlord had warned me it was old, but the rent was cheap and I needed something fast after my last living situation fell apart. The house came partially furnished, which was perfect since I'd left most of my stuff behind. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I'd been happy there, mostly. The scratching was faint at first, the kind of sound you can almost convince yourself you didn't hear. It came from above, somewhere in the ceiling of my bedroom. I'd be lying in bed, almost asleep, and I'd hear it. A soft rhythmic scratching, like something small moving around in the walls. I figured it was squirrels or maybe rats. Old houses get mice, everyone knows that. I set a few traps in the corners of the bedroom and forgot about it. But the sound didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. By the third week, I was hearing it during the day too, not just at night when the house was quiet. I'd be making lunch and hear it above the kitchen, or watching TV and hear it travel across the living room ceiling. And it wasn't just scratching anymore. There were footsteps. Deliberate, heavy footsteps moving across the attic floor. I mentioned it to my landlord, a guy named Garrett who owned a couple rental properties in the area. He came by that Friday with a flashlight and a tired expression. "Probably raccoons," he said, already heading for the hallway where a pull-down ladder accessed the attic. "They get in through the eaves this time of year. I'll check it out." He climbed up, his boots disappearing into the dark square of the attic entrance. I stood below, listening to him shuffle around, the sound of his flashlight clicking on. After maybe 5 minutes, he descended, brushing cobwebs off his jacket. "Nothing up there," he said. "No nests, no droppings, no holes in the roof. If there were animals, they're gone now. But I'll set some traps just in case." He did set traps, 3 of them placed in the attic near the areas where I'd heard the most noise. And for a few days, the house was quiet. I started to relax, convinced that whatever had been up there had moved on or been scared off. Then things started disappearing. Small things at first. Food from the kitchen, a loaf of bread, a box of crackers, a package of deli meat I'd bought the day before. I figured I'd just forgotten I'd eaten them or misplaced them. I'd been stressed at work, not sleeping well. It was easy to rationalize. But then it was my clothes. A pair of jeans I'd left in the laundry basket. A hoodie I'd draped over the back of a chair. A t-shirt I'd worn to bed and left on the floor. I searched the house, thinking maybe I'd absent-mindedly tossed them somewhere, but they were just gone. And then one morning I couldn't find my toothbrush. I specifically remembered leaving it in the cup on the bathroom sink, but when I got up to brush my teeth, it wasn't there. I tore apart the bathroom looking for it and eventually gave up and bought a new one. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. The scratching returned 2 weeks later, louder and more insistent than before. This time it didn't sound like animals, it sounded deliberate. It sounded like someone was up there, moving around, rearranging things. The footsteps were heavier now, pacing back and forth directly above my bedroom. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of someone walking. Sometimes I'd hear dragging sounds, like furniture being moved. Once I heard what sounded like a cough, a distinctly human cough. I called Garrett again. "There's someone in my attic," I said, trying to keep the hysteria out of my voice. "I'm serious. I can hear them walking around. Something's not right." He sighed, clearly annoyed. "There's no one in your attic. I checked it myself. You're probably just hearing the house settling, or maybe it's pipes." "Pipes don't cough," I said. "Pipes don't walk back and forth. Please, just come check again." He refused, said he had other properties to deal with and that I was overreacting. He suggested I call an exterminator if I was that worried. I hung up, furious and terrified, and decided I'd go up there myself. I waited until midday when the sunlight was streaming through the windows and I felt at least marginally braver. I grabbed a flashlight, pulled down the attic ladder, and climbed up. The attic was exactly as you'd expect. Dark, dusty, full of cobwebs and the smell of old wood. I swept the flashlight around, illuminating stacks of cardboard boxes, exposed beams, and the traps Garrett had set, all still unsprung. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just typical attic clutter. But then I noticed something near the far corner, tucked behind a stack of boxes. I walked over carefully, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and pulled the boxes aside. What I found made my stomach drop. There was a nest, a makeshift bed made from my missing clothes. The jeans, the hoodie, the t-shirt, all bundled together with old blankets I didn't recognize. Next to the nest was a collection of my things: the toothbrush, an empty box of crackers, an old hairbrush I'd thought I'd lost months ago, and on the wall above the nest, pinned with thumbtacks, were photos. Photos of me. They were printed on regular printer paper, grainy and slightly blurred, but unmistakably me. Photos of me sleeping. Photos of me in the kitchen. Photos taken from angles that made it clear they'd been shot from above through gaps in the ceiling or vents. There were dozens of them arranged in a grid like some kind of shrine. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking, and that's when I heard it. A sound behind me, the creak of a floorboard. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, and saw a figure crouched in the shadows near the attic entrance. A man, thin, filthy, with matted hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in months. He was staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He smiled, a slow, unsettling smile, and then he lunged. I don't remember scrambling for the ladder, don't remember climbing down or running through the house. The next thing I knew, I was outside on the front lawn, gasping for air, my phone in my hand. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They found him still in the attic, crouched in his nest, clutching one of my shirts. He didn't resist, didn't fight. He just sat there, rocking back and forth, whispering to himself. They said he was homeless, that he'd been squatting in the attic for months, long before I'd even moved in. He'd been entering through a loose vent on the side of the house, climbing in and out at night, living above me the entire time. The photos had been taken with a cheap camera he'd found, positioned through cracks in the ceiling and vents. He'd been watching me eat, sleep, move through my daily routine, collecting my belongings like trophies. The police asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. They arrested him for breaking and entering, stalking, theft. But the detective told me later that he'd probably get a plea deal, maybe sometime in a psychiatric facility. He wasn't dangerous, they said, just mentally ill. He hadn't hurt me, hadn't threatened me. He was just living up there watching. I moved out the next day, didn't even go back inside to pack. I had friends retrieve my essentials and I left everything else. I couldn't stand the thought of being in that house for another second, knowing what had been happening above me, knowing that I'd been sleeping and eating and living my life while someone watched from inches away. I have a new place now, a modern apartment on the 10th floor of a building with security and no attic. But I still hear the scratching sometimes late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep. It's probably nothing, probably just the building settling or the wind outside or my own paranoia. But I get up anyway. I check every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. Because I know what it feels like to be watched. I know what it's like to think you're safe, to think you're alone, and to discover that you never were. And sometimes late at night, I think about those photos pinned to the attic wall. I think about the hours he spent up there, watching me through gaps in the ceiling, documenting my life. And I wonder how many other houses have loose vents and dark attics. How many other people are being watched right now, going about their lives, completely unaware that someone is living above them, waiting. Story 7. I heard whispers coming from the empty hallway. House sitting for my aunt should have been easy money. She was going on a 2-week European cruise and needed someone to water her plants, collect her mail, and make sure the house didn't look empty. She lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors and nothing bad ever happened. The house itself was a modest ranch-style home built in the 80s with beige carpets, floral wallpaper, and furniture that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. It was dated but clean and comfortable. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon with a duffel bag and low expectations. My aunt gave me a quick tour, showed me where everything was, and handed me a list of instructions written in her meticulous handwriting. "It's very quiet here," she said as she pulled on her coat. "You won't be bothered. Just enjoy the peace and quiet. Watch some TV, help yourself to anything in the fridge. I'll see you in 2 weeks." She left, and I settled into the guest room, a small bedroom at the end of the hallway with a view of the backyard. The first couple of days were uneventful. I fell into a routine: wake up late, water the plants, binge-watch shows on my laptop, order takeout. The house was exactly as my aunt had promised, quiet, almost eerily so. No traffic noise, no neighbors blasting music, just the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the grandfather clock in the living room. The whispers started on the third night. I'd gone to bed around midnight, exhausted from doing absolutely nothing all day, and was just drifting off when I heard voices. Soft, urgent conversations coming from the hallway outside my room. I couldn't make out words. Just the low murmur of multiple people talking in hushed tones like they were trying not to wake me. I sat up, groggy and confused. My first thought was that my aunt had come home early, but that didn't make sense. I'd have heard the front door, heard her moving through the house, and these voices sounded like more than one person. At least 2, maybe 3, overlapping and indistinct. I got out of bed and crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. The whispers continued just on the other side, close enough that I should have been able to make out what they were saying. But the words stayed frustratingly unintelligible, like a radio tuned slightly off station. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty, dark and silent. I swept the flashlight beam from one end to the other, illuminating beige carpet and closed doors. Nothing. I stood there for a full minute listening, but the whispers had stopped the moment I opened the door. I convinced myself I'd been dreaming, or that I'd heard sounds from outside, neighbors talking in their driveway maybe, or a TV left on in another part of the house. I checked the living room and kitchen anyway, but everything was dark and still. I went back to bed, uneasy but too tired to dwell on it. The next night, the whispers came back. Same time, around midnight, just as I was falling asleep. This time they were louder, more insistent, and I could swear I heard my name. Not clearly, but buried in the murmur of voices, "Taylor, Taylor." I bolted out of bed, threw the door open, and turned on the hallway light. Nothing. Empty hallway, closed doors, silence. But this time, as I stood there in the harsh fluorescent light, I felt something shift. The air felt wrong, heavier somehow, like the space had just been occupied and whoever or whatever had been there had only just left. I checked every room in the house, turned on every light, looked in closets, behind furniture, even in the garage. I was alone, completely, undeniably alone. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, my laptop open but forgotten, listening to the house. Around 3 a.m. I heard them again, the whispers, but this time, they weren't coming from the hallway. They were coming from multiple places: the kitchen, the hallway, the room above me, even though the house was single-story and there was nothing above me but attic space. The whispers surrounded me, soft and constant, a dozen conversations happening just out of earshot. I grabbed my phone and started recording, holding it up like that would somehow protect me. The whispers continued for maybe 5 minutes, overlapping and swirling around me, and then they stopped all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. I played back the recording, my hands shaking, but there was nothing. Just silence and the faint hum of the refrigerator. By the 5th night, I was barely sleeping. The whispers had become a nightly occurrence, always starting around midnight and lasting anywhere from a few minutes to over an hour. And I was starting to understand them. Not all of it. The words were still mostly garbled, but phrases were breaking through. Watching her. She doesn't know. In the guest room. They were talking about me, describing me. I heard them say things I'd done that day. Ate leftover pizza, watered the plants, called her mom. It was like they were narrating my life, reporting my movements to someone or something I couldn't see. I called my aunt on the 6th day, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Hey, has anything weird ever happened in your house, like unexplained sounds or anything?" There was a pause. "Weird how?" "I don't know, just sounds. Voices, maybe." Another pause, longer this time. "Taylor, is everything okay? Are you feeling all right?" I wanted to tell her the truth, but I also didn't want her to think I was losing it. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thought I heard something the other night." "Probably nothing. Old houses make noise," she said gently, "especially at night when everything's quiet. It's just the house settling." I hung up, unconvinced. Houses settling didn't sound like people whispering. Houses settling didn't say your name. That night, I decided to stay awake and confront whatever was happening. I positioned myself in the hallway, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, my phone recording and my aunt's kitchen knife in my lap. If the whispers came back, I'd be ready. I'd catch them on camera, prove I wasn't imagining things. Midnight came and went. The house stayed silent. I started to nod off around 1 a.m., my head drooping when I heard it, a single whisper right next to my ear. "She's waiting." I jerked awake, scrambling to my feet, the knife clattering to the floor. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the whisper had been close, intimate, like someone had knelt down beside me and spoken directly into my ear. And then they all started. The whispers erupted from every direction, the walls, the ceiling, the floor, overlapping and chaotic. And this time I could understand them. They were describing me. Everything I'd done that day. Woke up at 9:30, made toast, watched 3 episodes, and wore the blue shirt and called her mom at 2:15. They knew everything. Every mundane detail of my day recited back to me in a dozen overlapping voices. I ran, grabbed my keys and phone, and ran out the front door into the cold November night. I sat in my car in the driveway, shaking, the engine running, debating whether to drive away and never come back. But I needed to know. I needed to understand what was happening. So I went back inside, my heart hammering, and headed straight for the attic. My aunt had mentioned it during the tour, said it was just storage, nothing important. There was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. I yanked it down, climbed up with my phone's flashlight, and swept the beam across the dark space. The attic was crammed with boxes and old furniture, all covered in a thick layer of dust. But in the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A camera. A small modern security camera mounted on a beam pointed down toward the attic entrance. And next to it, a laptop open and glowing faintly in the darkness. I climbed fully into the attic, my breath coming in short gasps, and looked at the laptop screen. It was split into multiple feeds, security camera footage from all over the house, the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, the guest room. Every room was being monitored, and in the corner of the screen, a chat window was open filled with messages. Different usernames, all watching the feeds, all commenting on what they were seeing. Commenting on me. "She's in the hallway. Did you see what she ate for dinner? She looks scared. Tell her." I scrolled up, my stomach twisting. The chat logs went back months. Different people, different houses. This wasn't just my aunt's house. There were multiple feeds, multiple properties, all being monitored and discussed by these people. And at the bottom of the screen, a microphone icon was highlighted. Active. They'd been watching me through the cameras. And they'd been whispering through the laptop speakers, their voices transmitted through hidden speakers I'd never noticed, describing my every move, narrating my life like I was a character in a show they were watching. I slammed the laptop shut, climbed down from the attic, and called the police. They came, investigated, found the cameras hidden in smoke detectors and wall outlets throughout the house. The laptop was registered to someone my aunt didn't know, a stranger who'd apparently installed the equipment while the house was being renovated the previous year. The police said it was part of a larger voyeurism ring, people who installed cameras in homes and streamed the footage to paying subscribers who watched and commented in real time. My aunt was horrified. She'd had no idea. The cameras had been so well hidden, disguised as normal household items that she'd never noticed. The people who'd installed them had access, contractors maybe, or someone posing as a repair person. They caught some of the people involved, but not all. The chat logs led to arrests in 3 different states, but the investigation is still ongoing. The police told me I was lucky, that some of the people who'd been watched had been stalked. Some had been burglarized, some had been hurt. I was just watched, just described, just narrated. I didn't finish the house-sitting job. I left that night and never went back. My aunt understood. She sold the house 6 months later, couldn't stand to live there knowing what had happened. I still hear the whispers sometimes. Late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I'll hear a soft murmur just at the edge of hearing. I'll check every smoke detector, every outlet, every electronic device. I've had my apartment professionally swept for cameras 3 times. They've never found anything. But the whispers continue, faint and persistent, describing things I did that day. And I know deep down that somewhere someone is still watching, still whispering, still waiting. Story 8. The window that was always watching. I loved my studio apartment the moment I saw it. It was small, just one large room with a kitchenette and a tiny bathroom, but it had character. Exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and best of all, a massive window that took up most of one wall. The window overlooked the street 4 floors below, offering a perfect view of the neighborhood. Tree-lined sidewalks, a coffee shop on the corner, people walking their dogs. The natural light was incredible. For the price and location, it was a steal. I moved in mid-October, just as the leaves were starting to turn. The landlord, a woman named Morgan, was friendly and efficient. She handed me the keys, gave me a quick tour, and reminded me that rent was due on the 1st of every month. "Enjoy the place," she said with a smile. "It's a great spot." The first few weeks were perfect. I arranged my furniture, hung some prints on the brick walls, and spent my evenings sitting by the window with a book, watching the neighborhood come alive at dusk. I felt lucky, like I'd finally found a place that was truly mine. The first time I noticed something wrong with the window was about 3 weeks in. I was getting dressed after a shower, standing in front of the full-length mirror I'd propped against the wall near the window. As I pulled on a shirt, I glanced at my reflection and froze. For just a second, less than a second, my reflection hadn't moved with me. It had stayed still, watching, while I lifted my arms to pull the shirt over my head. And then it caught up, the motion syncing with mine like nothing had happened. I stared at the mirror, my heart thumping uncomfortably. I waved my hand. My reflection waved back, perfectly synchronized. I moved closer, studying my reflection for any sign of delay or distortion. Nothing. It was just me, looking pale and tired. I laughed it off. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. My eyes were playing tricks on me. I made a mental note to get more rest and went back to my routine. But it kept happening. Little moments where my reflection seemed just slightly off. I'd turn my head and my reflection would linger for a fraction of a second before following. I'd smile and my reflection's smile would be just a beat too slow. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as paranoia or fatigue, but it was there, and it was always when I was near the window. I started avoiding the window at night. I'd close the blinds as soon as the sun went down, shutting out the view and the uneasy feeling that came with it. During the day, with sunlight streaming in, the window felt normal. But at night, even with the blinds closed, I felt like something was on the other side, pressing close to the glass. Then the reflection started moving when I wasn't. I was brushing my teeth one night, standing in the bathroom with the door open, and I caught a glimpse of the window reflected in the bathroom mirror. My reflection, or something that looked like me, was standing at the window, hands pressed against the glass, staring out at the street. I spun around, my toothbrush clattering into the sink. The window was across the room, blinds drawn, and I was nowhere near it. When I looked back at the bathroom mirror, the reflection was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed with all the lights on, staring at the window, waiting for something to happen. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a soft tapping on the glass. Tap, 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 rhythmic and deliberate. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The tapping continued for maybe a minute, and then it stopped. In the morning, I checked the window. We were on the 4th floor. There was no fire escape, no ledge, nothing that could have reached the glass. I called Morgan and told her the window was making weird noises, probably just the old frame settling or something. She said she'd send someone to check it out, but never did. The tapping became a nightly occurrence, always around 3 a.m., always the same rhythm. I started sleeping with headphones in, white noise cranked up, but I could still feel the vibrations through the floor. And then, one night I made the mistake of looking. I was lying in bed, headphones on, eyes closed, trying to ignore the tapping. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, until I couldn't stand it anymore. I pulled the headphones off, sat up, and looked at the window. The blinds were drawn, but there was a gap at the bottom where they didn't quite reach the sill. And through that gap, I saw a face. My face. Pressed against the glass from the outside, staring in at me. I screamed, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it at the window. The blinds swayed slightly in the draft from the heating vent, but there was nothing behind them. I yanked the blinds up, flooding the room with harsh light. The window was empty, just glass and the dark street below. But I'd seen it. I'd seen my own face staring back at me from outside, 4 floors up, where nothing should have been. The next day, I covered the window completely. I hung a heavy blanket over the blinds, blocking out all light. I couldn't look at it anymore. Couldn't stand the thought of what might be looking back. The apartment felt smaller, darker, but safer. For a few days, it worked. No tapping, no reflections. Just the sound of the heater and the muffled noise of the street below. I started to relax, started to convince myself that whatever had been happening was over. Then I saw it in other reflections. My phone screen when it was dark, the screen of my laptop, the glass door of the microwave. Everywhere there was a reflective surface. I'd catch glimpses of my face staring back at me with an expression I hadn't made. Sometimes it smiled. Sometimes it tilted its head, curious, like it was studying me. I stopped using anything with a screen. I covered the bathroom mirror, unplugged the microwave, kept my phone face down. But I couldn't escape it. Even in the dark, I'd see it in the window of a parked car when I walked to work, or in the glass door of a storefront. My reflection, always slightly wrong, always watching. I went back to the apartment one last time to grab my essentials. I didn't bother with most of my stuff, just clothes, my wallet, my keys. As I was packing, I made the mistake of glancing at the covered window. The blanket had fallen, pooling on the floor, and the blinds were up. I didn't remember raising them, and in the window, in the dark glass reflecting the dim light of my apartment, I saw myself. But I wasn't standing where I actually was. The reflection showed me standing at the window, hands pressed against the glass, staring out. And as I watched, frozen, the reflection turned its head and looked directly at me. It smiled. I ran, left everything behind, and never went back. Morgan kept my security deposit, said I'd breached the lease by abandoning the property. I didn't care. I couldn't explain to her what had happened, couldn't make her understand that my reflection had become something else. Something that lived in the glass and waited for me to look. I live in a new place now, a building with small windows and no mirrors. I don't keep anything reflective in my apartment. No screens, no glass, nothing that could show me my own face. But sometimes when I'm walking down the street at night, I'll pass a darkened window and see it. My reflection standing still while I walk past, watching me with eyes that aren't quite mine. And I know that whatever was in that studio apartment is still out there, still waiting in every piece of glass, every reflective surface, for the moment I let my guard down and look.